Hello, good morning, and thanks for joining me. I know it's been a long time since I dropped a video. Life kind of interfered, sort of a combination of um, economic, vocational, emotional things kind of combined into a great big neurotic bouillabaisse. But some things have been sorted out, so I'm back on track and making some videos here. Had a slightly more picturesque location than where I normally video from. Outside, having a nice day, but being outside, there's the possibility of background noise, so please excuse that. So, topic for today. Trends come and go, and the literary world is no different. Certain trends come into vogue, they become all the rage. Sometimes they fizzle out, sometimes they wear out their welcome. But again, pretty much like anything else in life. And a couple of those trends are tropes that I want to talk about today. That would be the morally gray protagonist and the sympathetic antagonist, the sympathetic villain. Sympathetic villain is one who either has a very tragic backstory and or has a legitimate point, has a legitimate grievance. So, before anybody gets upset, before anybody gets their panties in a wad, no, I am not saying these tropes, these characters are bad, that they should never be done, that they totally suck or anything like that. I think it's a sad commentary on our society that I have to make that disclaimer. It annoys me to no end that I do. I generally operate on the assumption I am interacting with rational adults and therefore should not have to make that disclaimer, but we all know how the internet and cyberspace work, so yeah, you got to make that disclaimer. So no, I'm not saying these things should never be done. Some very, very good, compelling stories and characters have come from these and will continue to. There will be other good stories written about this. I'm a Clint Eastwood fan. Love Clint Eastwood. Probably his two most iconic characters, Dirty Harry and the Man with No Name with his spaghetti westerns, were morally gray protagonists. They were trying to achieve their goal, which, if not on the side of good, was at least okay. They were willing to do some sketchy shit to do that. Your sympathetic antagonist, your sympathetic villain, probably the best example on that in contemporary entertainment media would be Magneto, the Marvel character Magneto. Has a very tragic backstory. You understand exactly why he feels the way he does. And in interacting with non-mutants, his point gets proven fairly frequently that, yeah, he's got a legit point. So yes, these characters can be done well and can create some good, compelling stories. However, like anything, if it's done to excess, it ends up not working out so well. Things overdone usually don't work so well. And a little peculiarity I've noticed about American society, and this might be true of people in general, but my life experiences living as an American in American society, I am comfortable saying that, yes, this is definitely true of American society. We seem to be incapable of finding a healthy balance between two extremes. As individuals, we do it all the time. We're very good at it, actually. You see the American political scene, there's right and there's left. Most Americans are pretty much centrist on that. For some reason, individual practice doesn't seem to translate into society-wide practice. I don't know exactly why that is, but that's how it is. But we tend to, as a society, we're either all of this, none of that, or we are all of that, none of this, and that kind of thing. And you kind of see that with these tropes and with entertainment media in general, trends that come up. Like I said, you get these trends. Well, the producers, the publishers of entertainment media see something that sells. They immediately glom onto it. Ooh, this is what makes us money, so this is what we're going to do. And they end up just saturating the market with it. And that's what we see here. with these two particular trends. That's kind of what's going on. So what happens when you overdo these trends? What happens when you overdo the morally gray protagonist? Well, you end up with a protagonist that doesn't really have a heck of a lot in the way of morals at all. And after a while, it doesn't take long, having that quality, that characteristic of that character of having few, if any, morals, well, they soon become indistinguishable from a villain, from a bad guy. Same thing, with the bad guy. You take the bad guy with a sympathetic backstory, or with a legitimate point. Well, okay, he's got a sympathetic backstory, and you understand why he does what he does, and he's got a legit point. Well, before long, this guy doesn't seem like such a bad guy. Those lines between good guy, bad guy start to get blurred. The problem with that, this dilutes conflict. And conflict is the driving force in the story. There is a conflict. Protagonist wants to achieve something, antagonist is trying to stop him. Now you got all your different types of conflicts: man versus man, man versus nature, man versus himself. Those were the three when I was in school. Since then, I think it's expanded to probably a dozen or so, or something like that. But in this case, we're looking at man versus man. The protagonist is trying to achieve something, antagonist is trying to stop him. Well, when you have a protagonist who is so morally gray, he doesn't really have any morals at all, it is a very short step from there to the guy just kind of coming across as a jerk, being unlikable. And he's this unlikable character, this kind of a jerk of a character. You find yourself not caring if he achieves his goal. In fact, you might find yourself kind of hoping he doesn't. He's a jerk. He doesn't deserve to win. Meanwhile, if your villain is too sympathetic, has this horrendous backstory that would turn Charles Dickens white, combined with a legitimate gripe, and he doesn't look like such a villain anymore, and you find yourself kind of rooting for him. You kind of want this guy to win. He's had such a horrible life. Geez, let the poor guy win one for a change. And he's got a legitimate gripe, which dilutes your conflict and can render the story largely pointless, which is the problem there. Now, I realize that there are a lot of stories where that dynamic is the point. That is what the writer is trying to achieve, trying to shake things up, trying to turn things on their head, trying to get you to question things. And again, that's fine. Those stories have their place. For sure and for certain, they have their place. And there's nothing wrong with those in and of themselves. Again, the problem is when they are overdone, which again is what happens. Like I said, the producers of the entertainment media, they're trying to make money. They see something that is selling and they just go nuts with it and just kind of oversaturate the market with it, flood the market with it. And I'm trying so hard not to go off on tangents because there are so many topics of discussion right there that I'm trying to avoid. I'm trying to stay on the highway, not get off on these little side roads, go down these little rabbit holes and things like that. And in addition to, so kind of staying on the highway here, in addition to rendering a conflict meaningless, which renders the plot and kind of the story meaningless, it can render the characters meaningless. The concept of protagonist, antagonist, hero, villain, you dilute that enough that they don't really exist anymore. Now, heroes need to be believable, and flawed heroes are much more believable, much more relatable. So no, you don't want this morally perfect hero. Again, it can be done properly, but it more often than not, I think it tends to lead to a very flat, dull, boring character that nobody's really interested in. Flawed heroes, again, more interesting, more relatable. But again, if you make them too flawed, they kind of stop being heroes, and again become indistinguishable from villains. And again, villains who are too sympathetic tend to stop looking like villains, um, and again become too sympathetic to the audience, just kind of diluting the entire thing. Um, but yeah, your flawed heroes, they do need to be flawed, but you don't want to be too flawed. Um, in fact, I think the perfect antagonist, the person who's held up as this shining, perfect paragon of virtue, uh, that was popular for a long time, and I think that's one of the things that led to the popularity of the morally gray protagonist. Here in America, our founding fathers were held up as these examples of what people should be, what good Americans should be. And that was for so long that we kind of forgot these were actual human beings. They achieved sort of this mythical status, these mythical figures, forgetting that they were, in fact, human. These weren't mythical figures, these were real people. As such, they were flawed. They had weaknesses. They did sketchy shit. They did things they shouldn't have done or that were questionable or what have you. And that kind of started coming out, I want to say in the 60s was when people started kind of recognizing. That was when we in America started questioning all of our institutions, pretty much in the 60s, and kind of led to a lot of this. And again, being Americans, we went from one extreme to the other. We went from these guys being figures of perfection to they're pure evil. And again, not being able to find that healthy balance in between. Having trouble understanding that yes, people do bad things, but that doesn't undo the good that they did. Yes, the founding fathers who spoke so eloquently of liberty and equality and freedom, some of them were slave owners. Yeah, that doesn't undo the good that they did. Looking at more modern figures, Martin Luther King Jr., the guy habitually cheated on his wife, on Coretta. That does not undo or cheapen all of the good that he achieved as well. So kind of understanding these guys are human. So they're your flawed heroes, your flawed protagonists. And that's another thing about the morally gray hero is I think largely they're more realistic. If you have a protagonist who's morally gray, that makes possible more depth, more authenticity, more substance to this character. Going back to our founding fathers that we idealized and basically canonized into saints, in order to achieve what they had to do, they had to compromise some of their morals. As they wrote the Declaration of Independence, they realized the slavery issue. Yes, they were perfectly aware of that. In some of the original drafts of the Declaration, Thomas Jefferson tried to address that. Delegates from the Southern colonies said, we ain't touching that. Well, okay, we can deal with this, but right now we got to deal with the British. The British are the bigger thing. Our independence is the bigger deal. We'll focus on that, then deal with slavery labor later, which I think is pretty much what they happened. So they had to compromise some morals to deal with a bigger thing. And again, that can make for a compelling story. Does that when do you compromise too much? So yes, again, these stories have their purpose. I'm not saying they don't. It's just when this is done too much. Again, the market is flooded with this. You have all kind of people producing these stories, and they're not produced well. And again, you end up with the protagonist who's so morally gray and the villain who's so sympathetic that they kind of stop being heroes and villains, which again kind of renders a story pointless if you don't have that. We need heroes. We need people we can root for. We need examples to look to aspire to. Historically, in Western literature, the knight has kind of fulfilled that role. Now, one of the first things you learn when you start studying medieval history is the knights were anything but paragons of virtue, by and large. A lot of them just kind of being hired thugs. But those knightly virtues, faith, justice, charity, mercy, courage, temperance, prudence, these things, I think those chivalric ideals are ideals worth striving for, even though the people that were held up as examples for them fell short. That does not render the ideals themselves invalid. And having those heroes shows us how we can aspire to those things. Even if we fall short, the hero can choose to pick up and carry on and try again. Likewise, with your villains, your sympathetic villains, they have these tragic backstories. Again, looking at a real life example of that, serial killers. A lot of them do have very tragic backstories, childhoods filled with abuse and neglect and just these horrible things. And if you focus on that, it becomes very easy to feel sorry for them, to sympathize with them and all of that. But you also need to look at when they became adults, what they did to their victims, the horrible things they did to their victims. Victims who, by the way, had nothing at all to do with their horrible childhoods. You have to realize that most people who are abused and neglected as children do not go on to become serial killers or psychopaths. And I think that's kind of what it comes down to, is choice. The abused child has no choice of what happens to them. The grown man does have a choice as to what he does with that trauma. And like I said, most people do not use that trauma to become serial killers. They can choose to rise above this and to carry on and become, if not better people, at least functioning people. Or they can choose to succumb to the trauma and to let it twist them and warp them and corrupt them until they become as bad as, if not worse than, the people who were so cruel to them. And again, I think that's kind of the thing there, the choice. And an example of that from my own writing, and it pops up in my stories a lot, but I think probably the best example is Reckoning. Both heroes and villains were on a path of vengeance. Okay, both of them had very, very tragic backstories that they were working from. But the hero, Beja, she's on her quest for vengeance against the people who murdered her family. She only harms those who murdered her family or their minions they hired to stand against her. Outside of that, she doesn't harm anybody. The villain, Dagrath, took vengeance on those who harmed him early in his life, which Beja didn't have a problem with. That was fine. She was fine with that, but he didn't stop there. He carried on. He started taking vengeance, as he saw it, against people who were like the ones who harmed and abused and traumatized him. In this case, anybody who could use magic fit that criteria in Dagrath's mind. So he didn't stop just with the people who actually harmed him. He kept going against people who didn't do anything to him, who posed no threat, who gave him no insult or offense, just because they were superficially like the people who did do those things to him. Destroying anybody who could use magic, which was what brought him into contact with Beja. He and his henchmen show up at her house to lynch her, essentially. She just happened to not be there at the time. So they settled for her family and brutally murdered her family, which then sets Beja on her path of vengeance. And at some point, at several points in the story, they have conversation. One of them, Dagger's trying to justify himself to her, justify his actions to her. Beja shoots him down, straight up saying, look, you took vengeance on the ones who murdered or who abused you and so offended you. That's done. The people you're taking vengeance on, they didn't do anything to you. They are blameless. You're harming innocent people, including her family, which was what set the whole thing into motion. And again, that's like it is. I think it comes down to choice. Villains and heroes show us how we choose. The hero showing us how we can choose to not give in to weakness, to rise above it, to be stronger than that and move on. The villains show us how choosing to succumb to weakness creates evil. Rising above weakness and choosing strength, destroying evil, succumbing to personal weakness, creating evil, furthering evil. And that is a message, I think, as screwed up as the world is now, I think we need that message more than ever. So, like any tropes, these can be done very well, have been, and will continue to be. Or they can be done poorly, which is what I think is the majority of being done. Personally, I think it's overdone and just kind of needs to go. I think this trend is kind of worn out. It's welcome, but that's just me. And again, handled well, make for good. So filming outside, it's a little breezy today. Blew my camera, my phone, over on my little selfie stick. If you haven't realized by now, production values on my videos are very low to non-existent. So I work with what I got. Sorry. But again, handled well, they can make for very good, compelling stories with good, well-developed characters. Handled poorly, they result in very unlikable characters, very pointless stories. And so, well, if the story's pointless, why am I reading this? Why am I watching it? So, those are my thoughts on that. Tell me your thoughts in the comments section. Do me a solid, hit like, hit subscribe, and I will start making videos with greater frequency, posting with greater frequency, and we can have other things to talk about as well. So, until next time, thanks for watching.